Welcome to the ninth episode of Heydorn and Watson, Douglas Social Credit. Today we will be speaking on or talking about the relationship between Douglas Social Credit and entrepreneurship and free private enterprise. We're going to explain how exactly the Douglas's social credit, economic and monetary reform will relate to and affect entrepreneurship and private enterprise, and how exactly it will really go a long way to help and provide a solid foundation for a true flourishing of entrepreneurship and private enterprise for those who are so inclined towards such vocations of life, I might say. So if we have Dr. Oliver Heydorn with us, of course. Would you like to input anything?
Yes, well, I think one thing that we should try to make clear, especially following up on some of the videos we've done carefully, is that we, of course, ideologically or otherwise, have absolutely nothing against entrepreneurship or private enterprise or anything like that. In fact, we're very much in favor of those things, provided that the good or service that's being produced actually does serve the common good. And if we had an honest, just, functional financial system, we believe that we could pretty well ensure that whatever is produced will in fact serve the common good, because it would be directed to the uses put forward by financially enfranchised and independent body of consumers. So we're not we're not in favor of a command economy or government ownership of the means of production. We think that for most production, it should be in private hands, and that certainly there is a place for entrepreneurship, for new ways of doing things and producing new goods and services, or producing old goods and services in new and better ways. There's always going to be room for that in a social credit economy. So I think we'll clear the air by making that clear to our viewers. The other thing that we should point out, and you've touched on it already a bit, is that not only is entrepreneurship, free enterprise compatible with social credit monetary reform principles, but the remedial proposals that Douglas came up with are themselves geared to facilitate entrepreneurship. They're geared to create a financial and economic environment which would make it easier for people who had innovative ideas that they wanted to test in the market to bring those ideas forth and to develop them. And perhaps one of the ways that we can see that this is in fact the case is the provision of a national dividend. Right? If everyone gets a national dividend, then that would give people a certain degree of financial security and independence, and put them in a position where they could more easily take the sort of risks that entrepreneurial efforts involve.
That's right. Yes, that's a perfect point, Oliver. And one of the what a lot of people don't realize, and particularly, the sort of those of the so-called bootstrap ideology, that anyone anywhere can make a great go of things even if they have nothing to begin with, no money, no financial security or basic material needs that are met. I think that anyone, regardless of how how strapped they are, material or financially, can make a go of entrepreneurship and become extraordinarily successful and build a large business. Well, that really that whole perception or thinking really does not reflect reality, because there's a saying, you need money to make money.
Mm-hmm.
So, as in, if you want to start a business, start an enterprise, that's in order to acquire money, to acquire profit, and build a business, market a product, and be able to acquire and supply all that is needed to construct and market that product. Of course, you need money and you need financial security, because more often than not, every new business or new enterprise that starts out small. It starts out making very little money, very little turnover, often not even enough for the person, the entrepreneur, to live on, hardly.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order to start that business and make it a success, which is not always guaranteed, because the reality is that as per the nature of the nature of the game, most new businesses fail within the first year of establishment, just because of trial and error. Some things fail, other things succeed. It's just by nature. When you have a go at things, you try to make a go of something, you try to innovate, and it won't always succeed. So there's an awful lot of risk involved in starting your own enterprise. And when you lack financial security, basic financial security, it's not just risky in terms of making it not just risky in terms of whether business is going to be successful. It's risky as to whether you're going to be able to eat and sleep the next month or the next week if your business goes south. So in this way, the Douglas Social Credit national dividend that would be distributed to every citizen, every adult citizen, would provide a base level of financial security upon which an entrepreneur could start and build their own business upon, and they would be free of their stresses and strains and even trauma of trying to stay financially secure whilst trying to spend the money and the resources on starting and building a business and trying to make it successful. So the national dividend would not only allow for entrepreneurship and provide private enterprise, it would encourage it, provide everyone a base level security upon which to innovate and start their own businesses.
Yes. So another point that I was going to make, just in reference to this idea that most new businesses fail, is that apart from the reasons that you cited, most new businesses are going to have difficulties as well, because they have to fight for a share in a market that is contextualized within the existing financial system. So under the existing system, according to the social credit analysis, there's this chronic underlying deficiency of consumer buying power, right? And this means that unless the economy grows at the right rate, and it has to grow exponentially in order to maintain equilibrium, there's always going to be some difficulty with companies trying to get as much money as they need to cover their costs and make a profit. right? Because
Mm.
consumers simply don't have the buying power. So under social credit, if we change that, we alter that to ensure, to guarantee, by means of the national dividend and by means of the compensated price, that whatever we produce, there will always be in the pockets of consumers sufficient buying power in the form of income to offset all costs, and hence prices that are simultaneously being generated in production. We can provide entrepreneurs in that way too with a more supportive financial environment where if they fail, it's not because there wasn't enough buying power in the hands of consumers or there wasn't enough effective demand. It would have to be because consumers really didn't want whatever good or service that the entrepreneurs were offering to the market. So by, you know, changing the financial system and ensuring that there is always going to be enough buying power in consumer hands to correspond to the costs of whatever we produce, you're going to create an environment where if it's really wanted by consumers, if the new product innovation is really wanted by consumers, they will buy it. They'll have the money to buy it. And this too will then go a long way towards stabilizing business conditions and making entrepreneurship less risky from the point of view of the business that they're running, right? So not only are
Yes.
we going to be securing them on a personal level, but even in terms of providing sufficient, at least potentially sufficient financial support so they can recover their costs in the economy. That also will be secured by the social credit remedial proposals.
Yeah. No, that's right. Exactly. And another point I'll make, it's ironic that that those, and that's an absolute perfect point that you make again, Oliver. And another ironic point that I'll make, or I just notice that there are those who are of perhaps the neoliberal or libertarian economic persuasion or ideology who say they're pro entrepreneurship, pro free enterprise, and so forth, and rightly so, to for the most part. But it's ironic that what they're proposing is pretty much a dog-eat-dog, ruthless, what is it, war of the jungle system, where people will have little or no financial security or financial floor upon which to build businesses or enterprises, start enterprises if they're so inclined that way, and have a keen passion and interest to market and sell a product. So in effect, the libertarian or neoliberal economic models are perhaps a less pro entrepreneurship or free enterprise, because they deprive the ordinary people, at least the people who are not already enfranchised with wealth, significant wealth and financial security, they prevent them from being able to start their own businesses. So as a result, by ultimate conclusion, biologically, you're going to end up with financial, economic, business monopolies, ultimately.
Yes, I was just thinking that basically what ends up happening is because there are these artificially constrained, restricted financial conditions, which makes it even more difficult for a business to start up and to succeed, it basically favors established businesses so that it's very difficult because of various barriers of entry, it's very difficult for new businesses to start and to get established, and therefore it's difficult for the market to be a perfectly competitive market.
That's right.
Yes. So it
which
reinforces.
is that's right. Well, it's quite ironic since the neoliberal, libertarian, whatever they may call themselves, tend to say they're all about competition,
Mm-hmm.
free competition. Well, it's quite the opposite, really.
Mm-hmm.
Under a totally laissez-faire
Mm-hmm.
economic system.
Right. The monopoly of credit, under which the economic system functions, basically favors the establishment of monopolies and oligopolies in all
Yeah,
these various markets, which
that's right.
is actually the opposite of the free enterprise ideal, right? Because the free enterprise
That's right.
ideal is one in
Exactly.
which you've got a large number of firms offering the same or similar goods and services and competing with each other, and that keeps prices down, and it serves the best interests of the consumer and the common good. Um,
Mm-hmm.
on the other flip side, I said that under social credit there'd always be enough buying power in consumer pockets. Because there'd always be enough buying power in consumer pockets, that also means that uh, credit for production or producer credit would also be liberalized under social credit. It wouldn't be so constricted or restrained. That is to say,
Yes.
one of the key axioms of social credit monetary theory is that whatever is physically possible and desirable should also be financially possible. And so, as
Yes.
long as we have the physical resources, the raw materials, the labor, the machinery, the know-how to produce some good or service, and on the other hand, an actual need or desire on the part of consumers for that good and service, then under social credit there would be no financial reason for restricting the flow of credit to producers. So the production side is also going to be liberalized, and if an entrepreneur has a good business plan and he can show and establish that there's a demand for this good or service, and of course, you know, buying power in consumer pockets is not going to be an issue, then
Mm.
whether it's from a private bank or from some other source, the credit needed to catalyze that production will be a lot more freely forthcoming than it is currently under the system we have, because under the existing system, credit both for production and for consumption in the form of income, these two things are both very severely and artificially restricted.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. No, that's right. Exactly. And so for businesses, particularly small businesses, startups, enterprises to survive, there needs to be a scope of um, not perhaps just regulatory freedom
Mm-hmm.
from regulation,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also financial and true economic freedom. That is a consumer base with the buying power to buy their products,
Mm-hmm.
and a financial monetary base for the entrepreneurs and businesses to construct, purchase, and acquire and sell in order to sell their products.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so social credit basically what it would do is it would level the playing field and financially, and therefore make it much easier for new businesses to start and
Yeah.
for small businesses to grow. And so now we're not going to impose entrepreneurship as an ideal on anyone,
No.
right? Not everyone has, and this is another thing that needs to be taken into consideration,
Mm.
not everyone has the ability, the aptitude, the
That's right.
inclination to start a new business, and not everyone would be obligated to become an
That's right.
entrepreneur to start a new business. But for those who are so inclined and who actually can serve the common good, and it is a vocation, an economic vocation in its own
Mm.
right, social
Mm.
credit would just make it easier for them to do that.
Yeah, and make it far more easier for them than, say, libertarian or neoliberal economic systems would. That's for sure.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. It's a very important point to make. Is that entrepreneurship is important. It's good. It's great to promote innovation and to promote the creation and the construction and provide the availability of good quality products and consumer goods that the people need. But it's an economic vocation that, as you say, is not for everyone. There's only some people are naturally disposed to it and towards it, and others that are not. There are some perhaps among the neoliberal, libertarian crowds who will say, "Oh, well, if anyone wants to make a go of providing for themselves and their families these days, they need to start their own business. Everyone needs to have their own business to start." Well, that idea is just impossible, and on so many levels, in that there can only be so many businesses, there's only so many consumers, and then only so much supply. And also, as you said, not everyone is disposed towards entrepreneurship, and not everybody wants to do it. Some people, a lot of people are inclined towards other things, like, say, the arts or service, charitable service to others, various ministries, social, religious, civil ministries, civil service, military service. So entrepreneurship is just one among many different economic and social vocations.
That's right.
That different people are inclined towards, either or. They're all equally important. All equally important. Society needs its entrepreneurs just as much as it needs its civil servants, its military servicemen, or its artists, or even the carers, medical workers, and so forth.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that probably touches on all the bases. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
We could also mention regulation, since that's a major point of concern for those who. That's a concern expressed by a lot of people who are entrepreneurs and business owners, particularly small business owners, is that they're often left hard up and face difficulty. Have experienced difficulty from heavy regulation and red tape that. Perhaps excessive. I mean, there has to be some degree of regulation to prevent abuse and corrupt practices and dishonesty and unsafe environments and things like that. There has to be a degree of regulation to prevent those sorts of things, but. Excessive regulation is a problem, and I think under a Douglas social credit monetary system with the national dividend, would you say that there would probably be less regulation upon businesses in a lot of ways?
Yeah, regarding regulation, the general social credit answer to that would be that directly or indirectly, most of the regulation that people complain about arises because the financial system is structurally dishonest and it is, in consequence, dysfunctional.
Yes.
And if we regulated properly, the regulator of economic activity, that is to say money, if we regulated the financial system appropriately, correctly, rightly, then a lot of these other regulations could go by the wayside.
That's
So
right.
just to give some example of what we're talking about, you know, if you look at certain safety regulations, I'm sure that, we'd continue to have certain health and safety regulations. But in the existing financial climate, it's not unusual that businesses will cut corners, not because they're malicious people necessarily, or because they're lazy or what have you, but because they feel financially pressured to cut corners in order to be able to compete in an economic environment where there isn't enough consumer income floating around to offset whatever it is we produce. And so there's this artificial flow of consumer buying power, and people fight over it. And
Yes.
as part of that fighting, it's, businesses can feel pressured to not do what they ought to do in terms of certain health and safety protocols. So the present system incentivizes a lot of things, which then require the state to come in and introduce further regulations, or come up with other monitoring systems to ensure that the existing regulations are enforced and things like this. And if that artificial financial pressure were substantially alleviated, and businesses could be put in a position where they, could abide by whatever sane and normal health and safety expectations were required, then the incentive to cut corners or to not do to a T what they're expected to do, that those things would sort of drop away, and you wouldn't need so many interventions then on the part of the state to try to keep people on the on the narrow path. And similarly, a lot of the intervention is, it's not even health and safety; it's labor related. And for the same reason that businesses, because they're trying to compete in a financial environment where consumer buying power is chronically anemic, they may end up mistreating labor, not following proper business practices regarding labor, and then again that requires the state to come in and in various ways to mitigate the damage or to mop up the damage, or and so what you end up having is regulations multiplied among regulations and regulatory agencies, and somebody's got to regulate the regulators, and before you know it, we're all sinking in all this bureaucratic red tape. And of course, all of that also is incentivized by the system because it creates jobs and more economic activity, which is one of the ways the present system fills the gap between prices and incomes. It's through economic growth. So if you grow the government,
maintaining full employment,
etc. So it's all very insidious, actually, when you start to look at it all. But yeah, the basic idea is that if the financial system were correctly designed and it was a functional system, then the state wouldn't have to intervene so much to make up for its present lack of functionality in 101 different ways. And as a result, regulations could be simpler, fewer, more direct, more to the point, and a lot of the regulations that don't really serve any purpose or that are redundant could simply be removed, and the regulatory agencies reduced in size, and people wouldn't be so smothered by all of this red tape.
Yes, that's right. Very good point again. Would you also say that, again, the national dividend would also help to take pressure off particularly small businesses, with regard to wages, providing a living wage and so forth to employees?
Well, it would in some sense. I mean, some small businesses, I think that's probably true of small businesses, even though they may like to pay a living wage, quote unquote, they can't afford to pay a
That's
living
right.
wage. And one of the reasons they can't afford it is because there's not enough income being distributed through the normal channels of business to offset the costs of business. And so through things like a national dividend, which should be given to everybody, regardless of employment status, in combination with compensated prices, um, you know, labor, the people who did have jobs, they would have their wages and salaries complemented or supplemented with the national dividend, and they'd enjoy compensated prices. And so those things would tend to promote a stable work environment where workers were not then always complaining about the cost of living or their
That's right.
lack of buying power, and more willing, therefore, to accept what the business actually can afford to pay.
That's right. Exactly. And also another point to make would be that also the national dividend would remove the pressure on businesses, again, particularly small businesses, to provide full employment. It's because a lot of small businesses can't employ people full time or on a permanent basis, or whichever. Mm-hmm. They can only employ people on a part-time, casual basis. Mm-hmm. So it would really take the pressure by abolishing the policy of full employment. It would remove the pressure on small businesses to have to provide everyone a job, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's true. So they wouldn't be as pressured, by people who are looking for work, because everyone's got to work. Only the people that they needed to fulfill a certain function would be hired, and those people probably in a social credit system would be the ones that are inclined to have an interest in whatever good or service
that's right
the business provides, and it wouldn't be the case that people are just applying for jobs because they have to work somewhere.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. No, and that's another way that social credit and the national dividend will really go a long way to help small businesses and really augment their ability to survive and thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, I think that brings it to a close.
Yep. We covered all the bases.
I think so. So we'll end there and pick it up again next week on a new and different topic.
Yes. Yes, sure. All right. Yep. So we'll see you next week for the episode 10 of Heydorn and Watson. And thank you, Dr. Heydorn, for your excellent, very knowledgeable input.
Oh, you're welcome. And we'll thank our viewers for taking the time to watch and listen to us. And please subscribe. And if you've got any comments, you can put them in the comments section. And we will join you next week. Take care.
Yep.